every human being has to answer the questions. Where do I come from? Why am I here? How do I live my life? And what happens after death? None of us can prove that our answers to those questions are right. But hopefully we have evidence that the way we answer those questions is right. See, so the question is not, why do you believe nothing? Nobody believes nothing, because life forces us to.
I've always been struck by the fact that evidence plays a role in faith, and to me that seems like a contradiction. In other words, somebody healing another person seemingly by divine inspiration.
Yes.
Or, for example, Jesus rising from the grave.
Yes.
These stories are put out there as you said, they're evidence that points to a certain belief.
Yes.
But faith doesn't need that evidence, correct? And so I wonder, why have the sort of human systems and the human stories and the human dramas in order for human beings to have some faith in something larger than them?
Okay. Now, we're not talking about Christ. We're talking about faith. And what I've heard you say, please correct me if I'm wrong, is whenever you bring evidence in, faith goes out the window. Because it's not, if evidence is involved, it's not faith.
No, I'm just saying that when evidence ends up being the sort of the thing we always resort to as the bedrock of convincing people to have a certain faith, it strikes me as contradictory, maybe even hypocritical. I don't know.
Okay. Sir, I think it's real clear that you and I have radically different definitions of the word faith. Your definition of faith, which is believing something without any evidence,
or believing something that I know I could never exactly grasp or understand, but still having a belief in it.
Well, that would be true. I can't grasp God. I can't totally grasp God. I can't totally grasp Christ. Come on now, be honest with me. I think you were pushing hard at a very fascinating point, which is you're convinced that faith is more of a feeling void of evidence. And once evidence starts coming in, your faith dissipates, right?
Well, I guess.
Isn't that what I heard you say? Correct me if I'm wrong.
It's just that. No, I'm just saying when I start to have sort of anecdotal evidence of particular kinds of miracles, for example,
yes,
like rising from the dead.
Yes.
I'll grant that's a miracle, but isn't it? I mean, I also sort of believe that dying and staying dead is a miracle, isn't it? Being born is a miracle. Mm-hmm. Breathing air is a miracle. So in other words, there's kind of like this hierarchy of miracles that religions seem to present. And why am I to believe that somebody rising from the dead particularly should spawn a particular narrow view of what God is and how we are to be saved, versus just understanding that I live awash in miracle, and that all these things are sort of beyond my capacity to know, and yet still have a faith that I exist for some larger system and in some larger set of causes or circumstances that are sort of, that will always remain beyond what I know.
Do you believe that what you just said is true?
Well, I'm interested in skepticism, and I'm interested that knowledge is to know that we cannot know, and I am interested in that contradiction. But I don't think it's necessarily a matter of you catching me in a logical conundrum. I'm actually sincere.
Yeah, and I'm being very sincere with you. And the sincere truth that I'm trying to communicate to you is, I hope that you realize, whatever your worldview is, you're making a truth claim. The same way, right? The same way that I am standing here making a truth claim. So we've got to be intellectually honest with each other, and we can't act like, well, you're really being open-minded and I'm really being closed-minded because I'm making a truth claim and you're not making a truth claim.
I've never claimed that you were being closed-minded.
All right.
I'm sorry. I understand that we're both making truth claims. I'm just wondering about the specificity and the particular hierarchy. Truth claims are also have various shades to them, wouldn't you say? I mean, there is sort of a spectrum of false and truth that we always deal with in this kind of existence. I mean, do you believe some things are disrespectful versus respectful, for example? There's a sort
That's
of
a moral truth.
Yeah, an arc there. So No, I'm not. I mean, yeah, sure. All we can do is grasp at truth claims. Isn't that right?
Okay. But my point is that that's why evidence is so important. Because you're right. There is a difference between truth and falsehood. And just because I can't prove something doesn't mean it's true. Just because I can't prove something doesn't mean it's false. The question for me as a thinking human being is, what does the evidence, not proof, but what does the evidence point to? That is why I think you and I have a different definition of faith. I am convinced that for me to say, I believe, is not good faith. I believe it's gullibility. That's why for me, before I believe, I demand evidence.
Where does that come into it? Who's doing this? Is that me?
No,
I mean,
but I think many people have communicated that very clearly. A little boy once said to me, faith is believing what you know to be a lie. And I think a lot of people in our culture have that definition of faith. Faith is believing something that has no evidence, you blindly believe.
But faith...
In fact, sir, yesterday I had a UConn student maintaining that their faith had no evidence, and the fact that I was demanding evidence showed that I did not have real faith.
There's so many assumptions to make with the way we communicate. It just occurs to me that...
Well, what are you doing right now? What are you doing right now?
I'm thinking.
And articulating, speaking.
Yeah, I'm using language, right.
Are we having a reasonable discussion, or is it totally unreasonable?
I think unreasonable, just because reason's not the basis of a faith or of a faith dialogue for me.
See, that's where we disagree. I am convinced you and I are having a reasonable conversation. I can promise you, sir, as soon as you lapse into the unreasonable, I'm going to turn to somebody else. And I had to do that yesterday, okay? One student started just being highly unreasonable. I said, listen, it's okay.
You mean civil or reasonable?
Reasonable. I'm talking reason. You start shooting gibberish at me, and I'm going to say, thank you, you have a good day, and I'm going to go to somebody else. You keep being reasonable and speaking language that's coherent and rational, and I'll keep talking with you.
So why favor rationality? I mean, isn't like
it's the only type of conversation I can have, a reasonable one.
Isn't it? I mean, again, it's just a lot of it's exclusive. When you're dealing with such grand things as God and the universe, the exclusivity smacks as it's. I mean, I understand we need to narrow in order to attempt to understand, but at the bottom of that narrow communication, I just feel like there should be a more open understanding.
How open?
We live in a varied and wild world.
Obviously, I agree with you. I do not know everything there is to know about God. What about the tree?
How does that figure into a worldview of heaven, hell, saviors, devils, messiahs?
You bet. Real simple. I am convinced that that tree is really there. That is why I'm not going to try and walk through that tree. I think that would lead to a painful encounter if I tried to walk through the tree.
But will you try to save the tree the way you're trying to save others?
No, I cannot have an intelligent conversation with that tree about God or Christ.
But you could have an irrational conversation with that tree.
Well, I don't know how to converse with a tree. Now, if you do, I'd like to see it. Please teach me how to talk to a tree.
Again, we're talking... What I'm saying is, I don't understand how to converse with that tree, correct? I also don't understand how to perceive the fullness of God. I don't understand creation where I come from.
I don't know the fullness of God.
I don't understand why certain people are sort of pegged as messiahs and that we're supposed to follow them and be saved by them. The fact that I don't understand how to communicate with that tree, to me, builds a larger faith system that could be sort of inclusive rather than resorting to sort of anecdotal evidence and trying to kind of mass people together with a sort of fear of heaven, hell, all those sorts of things.
All right.
I mean,
so you're into inclusiveness, so am I. But let me ask you something. If I display a racist attitude towards this woman, what does inclusiveness mean to you?
What does it? Oh, are you talking?
If I communicate to her that she is inferior because of her race, What does inclusiveness mean for you?
Okay, I'm confused about this shift in the conversation, first of all.
Well, I'm not, okay? Let me clarify if you're really confused.
I don't understand.
All right. What does tolerance and inclusiveness mean when it comes to me having a racist attitude towards her and you're standing here observing?
Okay, this is what it means to me. Personally,
yes,
just off the top of my head,
right?
That if you display a racist attitude toward anyone,
yes,
based on various racial features and things,
right,
you are an intolerant person.
Okay, but aren't you being intolerant by telling me that my racism is wrong?
I didn't say that I would necessarily be intolerant toward intolerant persons. I believe that the most difficult thing about tolerance is that one must learn to be tolerant of and toward those who persecute. I mean, and that's an ideal that goes way beyond usual human experience and interaction. I understand. I'm just as likely as the next person to attack somebody who does something racist or to, but if you want to talk ideal and idea, I think that what tolerance and inclusivity means to me is to always strive to include and be tolerant toward those who display awful attitudes. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to. Isn't that? I mean,
okay, that's where we're different. I am convinced that if this gentleman displays a racist attitude towards her, I'm going to look him in the face and say, sir, this woman has just as much value as all of us do because we're all created in the image of God. Life is not meaningless, and therefore your racist attitude towards this woman is absolutely dehumanizing and wrong.
And you're
but you see, the postmodern worldview says, no, you can't do that.
But you are being tolerant toward that person by explaining it and talking.
If that's your definition of tolerance, interesting. My point is, I do not tolerate your being racist towards her. I get in your face and I say, sir, please, your racist attitude towards this woman is dehumanizing, it's degrading, and it's evil. Please stop it.
It was funny that I mentioned you can't save the tree and we don't know how to talk to a tree, and you sort of, belittled my attitude about talking to a tree.
No, sir, I was not belittling your attitude.
We had a little laugh, and that's fine.
Yeah.
But how much more or less rational is believing in a heaven or a hell and things that we can't know or see? I'm just trying to say that you are just as likely to be intolerant towards certain attitudes, rationality, irrationality, as anyone, even though you sort of draw on race to sort of make a kind of a moral, you sort of lift yourself up in that way. I'm just saying that when we're talking about irrational things like faith, the afterlife, the beyond, God, things that go beyond our rationality, then I think we need to entertain things that you think are irrational. I think you're being exclusive, you're being intolerant of various attitudes that come. I think you need to figure out a way to open up.
All right, good. I am convinced that truth is exclusive. And I think you're having a hard time with your worldview that I hear you articulating, grappling with the exclusivity of truth. Now, you guys know that truth is exclusive because you can get an A or a B or a C or a D, or you can flunk. Why would you flunk? The only reason you're going to flunk is because you're out of touch with reality. You answer falsely on an exam. Now, isn't that incredibly narrow-minded and intolerant for your professor to flunk you? No, but your professor is responsible to teach truth. And if you get it wrong, you're going to flunk the test.
It's a bad analogy.
If I tell you 2 + 2 = 4, it does not equal 5.
It's a human system.
That is a truth claim. Every truth claim is exclusive.
2 is an intellectual. It's an intellectual system. Math is an intellectual system created by a human. But God goes beyond that. How can you use those examples to talk about faith in God and the things that we don't understand? It's one system set up by humans, and of course you could say there's truth and false within it. Of course you could say that. It's just the easiest thing in the world.
All right. Well, obviously Jesus Christ made truth claims. Obviously Jesus said, "I am the way, the truth, and the life." So obviously it's going to be exclusive. But guess what? The guy who says to me, "All paths lead to heaven," is making a truth claim. And that truth claim, "all paths lead to heaven," is a statement that those who believe that some paths lead to heaven and those who believe that one way leads to heaven are wrong.
Do you know what he really said?
What did Jesus really say?
No, I'm saying, do you know what he really said? I mean, you're speaking in an English translation that's been
From the
sort of
Greek.
gone through various. Yeah. Do you know what he really said?
Yeah.
Can you say what he really said?
He said, I am the way, the
Well, I mean,
truth,
not
and the life.
his
No one
language,
comes to
in
the
his
Father
language. Can you say
except through
what he
me.
said in his language?
No, I don't speak Aramaic. He spoke Aramaic to the
There are a
people
lot
of
of
his day.
levels of human language and translation between what you're talking about and what the books even say.
It was written in Greek, and it's translated into English. And I did study the Greek.
But Jesus didn't speak. Yeah, it was translated into Greek. I mean,
The Greek was the common language of the world, the known world at that time. And Alexander the Great made sure that Greek was the common trade language.
my part of this dialogue is to bring in a little skepticism. I don't know. Anyway, I appreciate you talking.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Have a good afternoon.
Is God limitless in his mind's complexity, in his complexity?
Well, there is obviously no way that I, with my mind, could ever understand the mind of God. But if God chooses to reveal, then I have the privilege of getting to know God. And that's obviously what Jesus claimed. He claimed to be this incredible creator God, revealing himself in a way that I, with my limited mind, can begin, not totally obviously, but can begin to understand.
Wait, so Jesus claimed he could create as well?
He claimed to be the creator God.
But I thought he was a human, and Jesus claimed to be the creator of God?
No, not the creator of God, the creator God.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we had a discussion earlier that he was kind of separate from, he was kind of separate from the eternalness of God, and he was living in our regular
in time,
three dimensions, space-time.
Yes,
whatever.
sir. Yes,
okay,
sir.
so he's living within that limits and boundaries of what, as human beings, we live in, which is 3 dimensions. We live within that. We can't move forward or backwards in time. We can only go forward.
Yep.
Which is the 4th dimension. We agree on that, right? We agree that the 4th dimension is the dimension of time. And we can only forward in that?
I don't know. I've not thought too much about that.
Okay. Well, from what we know so far, science tells us that we can only move forward in time, but there's the ability to move back in time. We just haven't found that out yet. Because we as human beings can only go forward right now. I mean, I don't know if science can solve that problem or not, but, so what we're saying is Jesus was had only the same abilities as we have, which is the ability to move forward in time. He has no supernatural ability that would make him able to transcend human ability.
Well, Jesus claimed to be the eternal God, stepping into space and time, but then obviously he ascended to heaven, and he went back outside of time as the eternal God.
Okay,
which means Jesus sees all of time at a glance, past, present, future. Remember, I do that circle?
Yeah,
God is eternal, and then that line.
What we can do as human beings.
I'm sorry?
That means he's transcending what we can do as human beings.
Yes,
right now.
yes, sir.
Okay.
Absolutely. He transcends what we can do, correct.
Currently in his human body.
He doesn't have a human body now.
Yeah, well, when he was in his human body, though,
Yes.
he could transcend time. That's what you're saying.
I'll show you later.
He could go back in time and he could go forward in time.
Not in his human body.
No. But isn't there a lot of miracles in the Bible?
Yes.
Where he does things that are unhuman-like?
Yes.
Do you believe that?
Absolutely.
But you believe that in his human body he was limited to human capabilities.
He limited himself, but this is part of the mystery of the incarnation. I do not totally understand what it means that Jesus is the eternal God becoming a human being. I mean, that is one big mystery to me. How the all-powerful God can limit himself and become a human being, that is beyond my ability to precisely explain. There's a lot of mystery surrounding it.
But you still believe it even though you don't really know.
Oh, absolutely. And that would be true about just about everything that you know. You know, you don't totally understand yourself, right?
Nobody can understand.
Exactly. You don't totally understand mom and dad.
So I mean, this may be kind of a different topic, but so you use religion kind of as a guiding tool for you, and that's fine if someone has a different religion, you know, because that guides them in their own, like a humanistic type way. Like if it helps you, do it. You believe that it's okay for anybody to believe anything as long as it helps them.
All right. I, as a follower of Christ, respect your right, and I would go beyond that. As an American, I would defend your right to believe whatever you want to believe. But I am convinced that God exists, I'm convinced that God has revealed himself in Jesus Christ. I'm convinced that you have a date with death. As Woody Allen said, the statistics on death are very impressive. 1 out of 1 die. So we're all going to die. The question is there life after death? 3 days after he died, Jesus rose from the dead. Over a period of 40 days, he appeared to over 500 people who saw him risen from the dead. Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. The evidence is he wasn't blowing smoke. His resurrection is solid evidence. He's in touch with reality. Guess what? I don't like the thought of your death. I like the thought of you living. I can promise you, if you fall right down now and have an epileptic seizure, I'm not just going to stand here and say, what's your problem, Jack? Right? No, I'm going to try and get 911, and we're going to get the meds here, and we're going to get you, hopefully, up and living. I don't enjoy doing funerals, okay? Death stinks. So I'm really concerned that we have life. Not just now, but if possible, for eternity. And I have found that in Jesus Christ, he offers us eternal life. So man, I just want you to live for eternity. That's why I want you to put your faith in Christ. That's a decision you got to make on your own. I obviously can't make that decision for you.
If you were born in India, though, say, what do you think your faith would be? Or any place where...
I do not know. Because I wasn't born in India. I was born in the Big Apple.
Well, what do you think someone from India would be more likely to worship?
Well, all you got to do is
Statistically
examine how many Hindus, how many Muslims, how many Christians, how many atheists there are in India. If you want statistics, look at that.
Okay, so and what do you think that would be?
All right, now, I have a fundamental disagreement with what I hear you saying. What I hear you saying is, correct me if I'm wrong, culture defines your belief.
Well, culture, you're born an atheist, technically. Culture teaches you to be a theist. So culture does define your belief. Unless God intervened with you at some point.
Yeah, I believe that God can intervene, but not only that, I believe you have a free will, and I believe that if you grew up in a home where mom and dad took you to church every Sunday, you can come to UConn and be an atheist. I am convinced that free will is real. I am not a behaviorist. I do not agree with B.F. Skinner. I think that you have a rational mind and a free will, and you can be atheist, you can be agnostic, you could be a Muslim, you could be a Christian. It's up to you. You decide.
But do you believe that you're born a Christian,
No, I don't think so.
So culture teaches us.
Teaches us, yes.
So
sure.
But you think it's creation of God, because God gave culture the knowledge of God, and culture is just passing on the message. Is that kind of what you're saying?
No, I believe that God hardwired you and all of us in such a way that we can know that God exists.
Yeah, so you said you know because you realized that you ran into a wall saying that if you say you know born, that means you're innately capacitated with it, meaning you're not, when you just contradict yourself because you said you were born a theist, you agree with it?
No, what I meant was that when you study anthropology, sir, you notice that all human beings have this innate ability to recognize God exists. So, in a sense, we're all born with a knowledge that God exists.
Wait, what's that evidence? Every human being has the ability, the innate ability through evidence of all human beings?
No, through evidence of life.
Even animals?
No, human beings. I don't know about animals. I have a horrible discussion with my golden retriever, so I don't know about animals. All right? But I do know human beings. And I know that human beings around the world have this innate ability to know there's a God.
So how do they express that?
Okay, let me give you one quick example.
How does a toddler express it?
I don't know how a toddler expresses it.
Because, yeah, there's no way to know until they're culturally taught. Unless you isolate a person in a black box their entire life.
All right.
Well, there's still a culture then. With more than
Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian novelist, really struggled with meaning and purpose in life. And he contemplated suicide. And he would talk to the philosophers of his day, the intellectuals, and he could not penetrate the question, what is my life for? But then he noticed that the Russian peasants had this incredible purpose in life, joy, and hope for life eternal. And Tolstoy began to realize it was their faith in Christ that enabled them to understand meaning and purpose in life ethics, and eternal life. And Tolstoy converted to Christ because of that. Because he saw that very simple people who didn't have the opportunity to get a higher education had this innate ability to get in touch with God, and their being in touch with Christ brought them into an understanding of the purpose of life, ethics, and eternity and hope.
But someone like that who's very basic, I guess, it's hard to use the word basic, would be more malleable and you'd be able to convert them a lot easier. So that doesn't really impress me so much as, say, a science mind being converted in some kind of way.
Read The Language of God by Francis Collins, head of the Human Genome Project. He has a deep faith in Christ. He's obviously brilliant. He's head of the Human Genome Project. He has a deep faith in Christ.
And what kind of faith, I mean, how does he align his ideas with the Genome Project? I mean, what does it matter that he's the guy who does the genome and that he's also a believer? How do those two, so you're using things that are separate, science and faith, to impress me about his faith, you know?
No, I don't know that.
Okay, so he's
what I do know is I told you about Leo Tolstoy and how impressed he was with the peasants. And you said, wait a second, I'm not impressed because those peasants are not very educated. So I switched and gave you an example of an educated person, Francis Collins, head of the Human Genome Project, who has a deep faith in Christ. He's a very educated man. Because I thought what you were implying is the Russian peasants are not very educated, so...
That's a good example, but what I'm trying to say is, what does, I guess I should be pointing, like, what does it matter what intelligence level they are?
It doesn't.
So why would you bring up the genome? I mean, obviously.
Because you asked the question, that's why.
Okay, well...
Come on now, you've been real honest with me out here. Let's not start jumping around here.
No, okay.
You're asking the questions, I'm just answering what you asked.
But I feel like I made a point here that it doesn't really matter what the person's accomplishments are.
That's correct. You could have just asked me that up flat up. That's what you wanted to talk about.
I didn't. I came about it. Like
Okay.
It was a watch on the ground that came together by chance.
No. What comes out of your mouth is not coming out by chance. You really think it is? I believe that God exists for almost the same reason that I believe that he has a rational mind. I have never seen God, I've never smelled God, I've never touched God. But I have never seen his mind, touched his mind, I've never smelled his brain. The reason I believe he has a brain is because he has dressed himself in an orderly way. And when I talk with him, the rational speech that comes out of his mouth convinces me there's got to be a rational mind. In the same way, I cannot prove God, I cannot see God, but the incredible intricate design of the universe points me to the fact that there's got to be an intelligent mind behind it all.
But it's intricate to you, but what's the threshold? Where's the spectrum that impresses somebody to the point where they can say it's intricate?
Okay. The reason I do not believe anybody who says to me, I don't think we're intricate. The reason I don't believe him is because if you need to have open heart surgery, you're not just going to go to anybody.
You see, in the Bible, it talks about the prodigal son.
Yes.
How this person screws up son and comes back.
Yes.
Now, that's how you're supposed to live up to and aspire to, is to give people many chances and forgiveness and whatnot.
Yes.
Wouldn't that make more sense to say, hey, I screwed up royally on earth, let's go back?
Okay.
That's more of a torture than I could say hell would be, because man, you have to live that crap again, but you'll also learn.
Interesting point. You're absolutely right. The prodigal son messed up royally. His father has his arms wide open, and the prodigal comes home, and the father doesn't say, get out in the field and earn your way back. He says instead to the servants, quick, kill the fatted calf, we're going to feast and celebrate. This son of mine was lost and he's found, he was dead and he's alive again. That's grace. But you're right. Jesus insists, the Bible insists, that this life, one life, is the time that God has given you and me to decide where we want to spend eternity, either together with God or separate from God. There is an incredible finality to death, according to the Bible and Jesus.
And then what exactly is separation from God?
Jesus defined separation from God as being hell. He did not give us a photograph. Obviously, people have tried to paint a picture of hell.
So then, theoretically, if you are separate from God, you can go somewhere else, correct?
You're either annihilated or you experience life separated from God. But you're not going to be with God.
If you're separate from this God, could you be sent to another one?
Well, according to Christ, there only is one God.
Alright.
There are not many gods.
But then Christ only had one point of view.
Just the same way you and I only have one point of view.
And that was from one culture. And it's...
Remember, everybody has one point of view. The person who says, all roads lead to heaven, has one point of view. All roads lead to heaven. The person who says, some roads lead to heaven, has one point of view. Some roads lead to heaven. The person who says, one way leads to heaven, has a point of view. One way leads to heaven.
So based on all the evidence I see before me, how would you convince me to switch this religion if indeed Christianity is very evangelical in nature?
All you have to do is ask yourself, who or what am I living for? And secondly, what is the evidence that what I'm living for is true? Then you need to look at Jesus Christ by reading the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and ask yourself, is there not more evidence of his life, teachings, death, and resurrection that point to Christ being credible and reliable than there is evidence that the object that I put my faith in, whatever that object is, and obviously I don't know for you, you have to answer that for yourself, is there not more evidence that Jesus Christ is reliable as opposed to the object I've chosen to put my faith in? Let me give you one quick example. And I don't know that this is true of you, obviously, because I don't know you. But many people say to me, Cliff, unless you can scientifically prove it, it's not true.
Not necessarily.
Okay, but do you realize what a philosophy that is? That is a faith. Because all you've got to ask that person is, would you please scientifically prove to me that unless you can scientifically prove something, it's not true? You see, science is a wonderful branch of knowledge. But there are so many philosophical questions in life, it's incredible. And yet there are many Americans who are making this incredible mistake of saying, well, my faith ultimately is in science. That is so embarrassing. It's scary. How do you go on a scientific date? How do you run a family on science? How do you have a friendship scientifically? How do you scientifically show me that George Washington was the first president of the United States? Science is a wonderful branch of knowledge, but it's a very, very narrow branch of knowledge.
You know, 4 different accountings of Jesus' life, and only in one of them does he say, you know, forgive them for they know not what they're doing. In another accounting of the Bible, he asks, you know, God, our Father, why have you forsaken me?
Right.
So how do you explain this contradiction here?
Well, sir, there's absolutely no contradiction. What is a history? Every history is a selective account of what really happened.
But I mean, those are two radically different ideas. You know, if you're trying to express the mindset of Christ, you know, one of them he understands what he's doing. You know, he realized he's died in sins, and the other one he has no idea what's going on. He doesn't understand why he's been offered up as a sacrifice by God. So which is correct?
You bet. What Jesus insisted is that when he was dying on the cross, God the Father put the sins of the world on his Son Christ. In other words, Christ became sin. And when he became sin, he was separated from his Father, whom he had spent eternity with, and he experienced a cosmic alienation from the Father. And understandably, he cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me? In 2 Corinthians 5:21, Paul writes, God made him, Jesus, who had no sin, to be sin for us. So God the Father poured out his wrath on my sin on his Son Christ. Christ paid the penalty that I deserve. That's why he can offer me forgiveness. God is just. The penalty for my sin is death and hell. But God is also forgiving. And the justice and the forgiveness of God come together at the cross of Christ, where he absorbs, as a substitute for you and for me, the penalty we deserve for our wrongdoing, thereby offering us forgiveness.
Well, okay, so you say that God is just, so he puts all these sins on his son, but, I mean, isn't it unjust to set a standard that humanity can't possibly live up to?
Good question. Adam and Eve did not have to sin, and in a very real sense, I don't have to sin, neither do you.
Well, you just said in your own life you've tried to live a sinless life like Jesus, and you have failed.
I sure have.
And so I would say that it is, while it's a great aspiration to have, no one can actually live like that. It's not. There are the levels in your life that are just it is inhuman to be able to resolve. So isn't that unjust to expect more of his creations than we are capable of?
Okay, good question. You're right. I was not born with a perfectly clean slate. I was born with what Dallas Willard, the philosophy professor at USC, calls a readiness to sin factor. And so are my 3 kids. And if you work with children, you see that readiness to sin factor in little children. All right, so you're right. We're born scarred. Absolutely correct. We're born scarred. So now the question is there a solution? And that's what Jesus Christ offers. Now, even though we're born scarred, don't you and I respect the Mother Teresas, the Gandhis, the Dr. Martin Luther Kings of this world, the Harriet Tubmans? When we see people who live exemplary lives, we sit back and say, wow, that is really good. I respect that.
But even those people don't live up to the standard. I mean,
exactly.
My Mother Teresa, we find in her diaries that she was, in great doubt of God until the day she died.
Yes. And I find that kind of honesty refreshing, don't you?
Oh yeah, no.
I love it. I can promise you,
but still,
anybody who doesn't doubt is probably on their way to being brain dead. So nothing wrong with doubt. The question is, what do you do with your doubts? Do you allow your doubts to harden into unbelief? Or do you allow your doubts to motivate you to investigate further? One quick point. Every human being has faith. What does that mean? Every human being has a worldview. What does that mean? Every human being has to answer the questions. Where do I come from? Why am I here? How do I live my life? And what happens after death? None of us can prove that our answers to those questions are right. But hopefully we have evidence that the way we answer those questions is right. See, so the question is not, why do you believe nothing? Nobody believes nothing, because life forces us to put together a worldview. And it was fascinating. Yesterday and last week, a UConn student just couldn't grasp what I was saying. This UConn student was insisting, I'm agnostic, I do not know anything about these questions. I said, really? You're lying to yourself and to me. Look at you, you're well dressed. Look at you, you're a talented student here at UConn. You didn't arrive here by accident. You have priorities, you have motives, you have a worldview. So get in touch with your worldview. Get in touch with what motivates you, what you're living for. Because you wouldn't be here by accident, that's for sure.
But you still haven't really answered my question. Why would God set a standard we can't live up to if we are His creations?
Well, Adam and Eve were more than able of living up to that standard. Now, that standard doesn't change, because you see, the standard that God sets is His character, which is eternal. Okay. That standard is justice, compassion, goodness.
So you're saying that our problem is original sin?
That's part of it. But I can't blame my grandparents, because to be honest with you, sir, I have done that which I knew was wrong.
Okay.
And I can't, I've been proud, I have lusted, I've been greedy, I've had sexist attitudes, I've had racist attitudes, and my African American brothers and sisters and my fellow human beings who happen to be women have had to help me work through some of those attitudes and help correct me. So I am responsible for what I choose to do. Now, yes, I have this readiness to sin factor. The Bible calls it a sinful nature, for sure. But I still am responsible for what I do.
Okay. So, again, we're back to the point that you have the you have this inclination, and it is almost inhuman to try to live up to the standard of that God sets out. So how
right
can he
to
be
the
a just
contrary.
God if he wants too much of us?
It's human. It's what it means to be human, to live up to that standard. It is degrading of me and degrading of him for me to curse him, for me to dump on him, for me to be sarcastic with him and rip him to shreds. That's inhuman. To be human means, as God created us to be human, to respect him, to love him, to think about his needs, to seek to meet his needs. Now, I don't do it perfectly, that's for sure. But as I aim at that standard, I'm becoming more human, as God created me to be human.
Okay, I guess my question is then, why is the penalty death and hell for doing something that, for a standard that almost no one can live up to? Yeah.
All right, you bet, great question. Because in reality, this man is of inestimable value. So when I dump on him, that is really evil. And when I basically say, hey God, when you made him, lousy job. Not only am I attacking him, but I'm also attacking the God in whose image he's created. I'm basically saying, God, I got a better way to live life. Instead of respecting this gentleman, I'm going to be disrespectful. And God says, guess what, Cliff? You could not be more wrong.
The chance of all of this happening is infinitesimally small. So when you have such a large pool of these accidents, you're bound to get one that succeeds in creating intelligent life.
Okay, so what I hear you saying is, you believe life comes from non-life. I'm sorry, I've never seen anything to back that up. What you're telling me is, the personal comes from the impersonal. I'm sorry, I've never seen anything to back that up. You're telling me that order and design come out of chaos by chance. I'm sorry, I've never seen anything to back that up. You're telling me that the rational, a thinking mind, comes from the non-thinking, the irrational. I'm sorry, I've never seen anything to back that up. Sir, you have so many miracles you believe in, but the problem is you don't have a miracle maker. That's why I feel you're an intellectual hypocrite, because you're not willing to face the fact that if I believe we're all accidents, life is meaningless, morality is relative, and death is obviously the end. And you got to read Friedrich Nietzsche. He pours scorn on you guys.
By saying that, though, you're saying that all these things that we can't understand, all these things, all these accidents, all the creation of life from non-life, all these things that we can't understand that science has not yet to explain, the only way we could possibly witness something like this happen is because there must be a God.
Sir, it is impossible for science to explain the meaning of life.
The meaning of life is something, it's like beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
No, sir.
The meaning of
it is
life
a
can be
philosophical issue. Therefore, science has nothing ever to say about meaning of life, because it's not a scientific question. It's a philosophical question. Science has nothing to say about right and wrong, because it's not a scientific question. It's a philosophical, theological question.
So what is the meaning of life?
Well, obviously, if there is no God, there is no meaning to life. We just happen. But if there is a God who creates us for a purpose,
what's that purpose?
To love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. That's why God made us. To love God and to love each other.
It sounds like a selfish God.
Yeah, that's what it does. It sounds like God conceded if he created us to love him.
Good. Very good. Who benefits most from me loving God? I do. Who benefits most from me loving other people? I do. The reason that God created me to love him and to love people is not because God desperately needs my love. It's not that he's insecure and needs me to massage his ego. Rather, it's because he's a loving being who created me to interact with him, not to be dominated by him, and to interact with other people. That's why he created us. That's exciting. And guess what? If you'll examine your life, you'll have to admit, yeah, That is the bottom line for me in life, isn't it? My relationships. That's what brings my life joy, meaning. My relationships.
I can believe that without believing God created me. I
know that.
I can associate like the universe as our creators.
You can believe anything you want to
All
believe.
your accidents.
But the question is, why do you believe what you believe? And if you tell me there is no God, and then you talk about love as being more than a chemical reaction, you're an intellectual hypocrite. Because if you're a naturalist, if you're an atheist, you have reduced reality to matter and energy, which means love is simply a chemical reaction.
Why can't you be spiritual without believing in God?
What does it mean to be spiritual?
Believing in something other than just matter and energy, but you don't have to believe that there is a supreme being. You can still believe in love. You can still get meaning from your life by loving other people, but not loving God.
How on earth do you get a real, intangible value of love if there's no creator? How does that happen? It's impossible, man. Because if there is no God, reality is matter and energy. There's no spirit. You see, when you say there is no God, you're limiting reality. And you're saying, you want to know what real is, Cliff? Real is matter and energy. And I'm saying, guess what? You know better than that. Because although you experience matter and energy, you also experience this innate drive for meaning. Now that doesn't have meaning. And neither does electricity. No meaning there. It takes a conscious mind to understand meaning. And if there's no conscious mind prior to the human mind, then obviously it's the human mind that creates meaning. And if my meaning in life is to date rape, I'm not wrong, I'm not right. It just is. And for you to tell me that there's some absolute meaning in life is totally false. You can create your own meaning, and I can create my own meaning, but we better realize it's a fantasy. It's a prejudice.
So what about religions that believe in many gods and don't believe in one God like you? They get meaning out of life.
And they are consistent. And they are intellectually consistent. But the atheist who says there is no God or gods, but there is meaning in life, is being an intellectual hypocrite. But if you're a theist, be you a pantheist, be you a polytheist or a monotheist, it doesn't matter. But if you acknowledge that there is some type of God, then you're right. You can have real ultimate meaning in life.
So if I don't believe in God, but I live a good life, I'm kind, I'm generous, I'm very moral, but I don't believe in God, am I going to hell?
If you're an atheist, why are you concerned about hell?
Well, I'm just wondering from the perspective of someone who does believe in God. If there are people who don't believe in God, but they're good people, do they go to hell?
If you are truly good all the time, 100% of the time, you'll go to heaven. You're a morally perfect person. But if you're like me, someone who tries to do good but too frequently does evil, if you're like me, someone who's chosen to rebel against God, then you wouldn't want to go to heaven, because heaven you have to live together with God. So hell would be better, because in hell, you're separated from God.
From a materialistic perspective,
Right.
I think absolute morality, if you're an atheist, you cannot have absolute morality. You can't say, well, there is an absolute code. However, you can have a matter of practical morality, which says, I agree with other people, we're going to call this thing wrong, and we're all going to act as if we're not supposed to do this thing, say murder other people. And generally, it's beneficial for me, because if I follow this, then my neighbors will follow it. Would you consider that to be intellectually consistent? Because from an evolutionary and social perspective, that to me makes sense.
Absolutely.
And I can call things, I can say, it's really good for you to give money, and say, I can say that's really good, and I don't mean that in an absolute sense, but I mean that in that's how it makes me feel, and from a practical sense, by evolutionary and social matters,
Exactly.
it's good.
Exactly. But if I come to you as a Nazi saying, my society has agreed that Jews are inferior, need to be gassed, you're not right, I'm not wrong. I'm not right, you're not wrong.
And there is no
It's
way.
all relative.
Yeah, and there is no way I can prove that. As from an atheistic perspective, there isn't. I can say I think, for empathetic reasons or for how I feel it's wrong, but no, I don't think you can find any atheist who will actually argue that absolutely by some intangible standard it's wrong.
Good. But here's why it's impossible to live that out. If he steals something from me, like my bike or my backpack, when I look him in the face and say, you should not have stolen my bike, you ought not to have stolen my backpack, all of a sudden I'm appealing to this intangible standard outside of him and me. I'm appealing to his conscience and saying, come on, buddy, wake up and smell the coffee.
Are you appealing to an intangible absolute moral, or are you appealing to his empathy, his feelings, and the social standard that's been set up?
I'm appealing to his conscience, which hopefully ties him into moral absolute, that stealing is wrong.
I guess.
When I'm married
No, go ahead.
to a person, I think if you ever marry a person, at times you're going to look that spouse in the face and say, you should not have treated me that way. And whenever you use that word should, you're appealing to an outside standard and saying, I hope that you use your mind and your conscience to inform you that that behavior is wrong. See, that's not coming from atheism.
In nature, species who survive are not necessarily the strongest, not necessarily the fastest, not necessarily the smartest, but those most adaptable to sudden and dramatic change. And if you highly specify, you lose that ability. And it's because we have such a diverse gene pool that random mutation can happen, even in handicapped people, mentally handicapped, physically handicapped, which is why these people are important to the gene pool. I mean, from an entire species standpoint, everyone is very important to the survival of the species.
Great, that's your view. But obviously, the Nazis insisted the Aryan race is a superior breed to other races. That's why we have to wipe them out and get everyone to follow the Aryan way.
And which is why their argument was incorrect, because they were looking so very short-sighted.
That as well. Switching the topic. I'm only wearing black until they make something darker.
Yes.
What does that mean?
It means it's hilarious and I like to wear it.
Very good. What do you think of Jesus Christ?
Well, I think he was a man, and I think that even by secular definition, he was a saint. I mean, he was probably a fantastic person. If I went back in time and met him, I would say, you're an incredible person. I believe your next question would be, do I believe in God? I wouldn't say that I do. I wouldn't say that I'm an atheist, however. I do think that there's more to the superstructure of the universe than we even think is there. I think that maybe the idea of what I believe in is something that other people could call God, but that's not the way I like to look at it.
Okay, now this Jesus who you respect so highly, obviously he claimed to be God.
Okay.
How do you handle that?
I believe that the idea of God, if you want to define it as God, I like to think of it as a more abstract idea and say that yes, this sort of idea is there. And I think it's a part of all of us. And someone so saintly as Jesus could rightly say that he is God. And, I mean, it's sort of like the proof is in the pudding sort of thing, that he was such a good person. And, I mean, he just wanted to teach people to be good to other people and to teach them how to live a meaningful life and things like this. That, it's there in all of us, and it's just a matter of bringing it to the surface.
Okay, but the problem is that he repeated the Shema of Israel. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. So he was a strict monotheist, one God. And then he goes ahead and claims uniquely to be God in human form. I mean, isn't he a candidate for a mental hospital at that point?
In today's society, most people would likely look at him that way, yes, but I don't think that, I mean, he wasn't hurting people. He wasn't, you know, he wasn't advocating slaughter of millions.
That's for sure.
He was just going around, he was living with the impoverished, he was living with, you know, prostitutes, and, you know, he was with them, and he was showing them there's something better for you.
Good. Exactly. But my problem with what he says then is, he says, if you believe in me, you're going to heaven. If you reject me, you're going to hell. I mean, if you have a professor here at UConn who teaches good teachings all semester long, then, lacking the persuasive skill to motivate you to study for his exam, he threatens you with expulsion from UConn if you get below a 90. I would not call the dude a good teacher. I would call him a crass manipulator who, lacking the power to, or the persuasive skill to motivate you to study for his exam, he threatens you. I mean, would you call that good?
Probably not.
I'm with you.
Well, because what he was starting with was the basis of Judaism, which, I mean, of course, didn't have hell, but they did have the idea of God and the idea that, you know,
judgment.